12 minutes to the hour. This is Paris Live PM. Time now for our Live on Live segment. And the German Chancellor Angela Merkel is busy now going about her duties as Chancellor, the start of her fourth mandate, coming on the back of 6 months of uncertainty during which Germany's various political players struggled to form a government. With us to discuss Germany's new political landscape, the rise of the far right, and how issues such as migration and abortion are driving policy in the country is RFI's Berlin correspondent Emmanuelle Chaze. Welcome to the programme.
Thanks for having me.
We're back to another grand coalition in Germany. Merkel's Christian Democrats Union has two coalition partners. These are the same as during her last mandate, her Bavarian sister party, the Christian Social Union, the CSU, and also the Social Democrats, the SPD. Things are very different now, however. We're seeing big policy changes, aren't we? And this is because Merkel's lost a lot of support. And she really only hobbled over the finish line in terms of winning that fourth term. So firstly, Emmanuelle, let's rewind back to elections in September. Both of the mainstream political blocs suffered their worst post-war election results. Tell us just how bad was it and how has that vote changed things in Germany?
Well, it did change because, as you said, it's the worst results for both the SPD and the Conservatives. And like we see it in Germany as a backlash for the joint policies they had during the past mandates, the past coalition they had together. So on the one hand, we have SPD voters who feel their party hasn't really delivered in terms of social development, for example, speaking in terms of pension, health insurance. Even if thanks to the SPD we saw some improvements such as the introduction of the minimum salary, the same-sex marriage last year. So those were milestones for the Social Democrats, but overall their electorate got disappointed because their policies was that of many compromises with the conservative parties. And on the other hand, we have those conservative parties which didn't respond to the worries of many citizens, specifically on the migrant and security questions, for example. And Merkel's decision to open the borders was highly controversial at the time of the migrant crisis in 2015. But although she got a lot of praise internationally for taking a humanitarian stand in this crisis, at home she never really recovered from that decision. And that's precisely what weakened her and facilitated the rise of populism to the AfD, which thrived in that situation of crisis. So the so-called worried citizen who were traditionally leaning on the conservative side just went further right to vote for that new party because they were done with traditional ones such as the CDU and the CSU.
Now, the country was without a government for 6 months. I suppose that's a long time to be in limbo, and the parties which she failed to form a coalition with at the beginning, I think they were the Green Party and the Left Party, they've come out and sort of criticised her, saying that she has lost authority. Unsurprisingly, the far-right party has done the same thing. Just how weakened is her position?
Well, those 6 months in limbo, it was a precarious situation. It just goes on to show how bad this situation has been ever since the September elections. Angela Merkel is no longer the person the Germans used to call affectionately Mutti, so mother. She's still popular, but by far not as much as during her first 3 mandates. And now you can really see that popularity eroded. And again, it's mainly because of the migrant question and the austerity. And as I was saying, this migrant question was a hugely divisive topic in Germany, yet she is still there. And even with a short majority, there is at the time no other politic personality within her own party, the CDU, who could take over with the same popularity and the same international charisma and recognition as Angela Merkel.
Right now, she is again the German Chancellor. For a long time, that wasn't sure. I'm just wondering how this whole period of uncertainty was reported in the German press.
It was the first in post-war, or rather post-reunification Germany, but the previous government was still in place during this transition period. So from the outside, it looked very un-German and very disorganized. But it's not as if all of a sudden there was no running institutions anymore in Germany. It was more of a statu quo, which certainly didn't do any good for Germany's reputation in terms of efficiency. But at the same time, it was also a good time for German media to provide an in-depth reporting on why exactly there was this loss of trust towards the government. The German press is much more sober, I would say. So while there was speculation as to who would become minister of what, etc., it was more a time of a political reflection on the political direction that would be taken by the country, especially now that we're heading towards 3 more years of more or less the same.
Right. That's interesting, isn't it? Let's just look a little bit more into the detail. There was a lot of toing and froing with the SPD eventually doing a backflip on joining the coalition. At first they said they didn't want to. They wanted to be more of a viable opposition force. They're in government now again. This is another grand coalition with the same parties. Things are different now, though, because the lineup of that coalition is different. There's been a reshuffle with the Merkel's party giving up, ceding, if you like, some key ministries. Tell us, how will things change now that Merkel has handed over control of the interior and finance ministries?
Well, it will be much tougher for her, of course, to rule. It wasn't an easy negotiation, otherwise it wouldn't have taken so long either. And she had to give up key ministries. For example, the finances and the vice chancellor are going to SPD's Olaf Scholz, who was formerly mayor of Hamburg. And that will be a big change from Wolfgang Schäuble, who was the father of the austerity and the advocate of German and European austerity. Then we have also the foreign Affairs Minister Heiko Maas and Katharina Barley as Minister of Justice, who also come from the SPD. So Angela Merkel will has definitely given the SPD a lot of leverage within that government. And interestingly, we might see that it's within her own ranks that the first controversies will appear, because there's also a lot of divisions within the Conservative Party.
So you think we can expect not necessarily a very smooth government then?
Not really. And as I just mentioned, troubles could even come from her own allies, because last week the health minister, Jens Spahn, had said, that was quite controversial, that there wasn't really anyone dying of hunger in Germany, which sparked outrage, obviously. And the former president minister of Bavaria, Horst Seehofer, who was a long-time opponent to Angela Merkel on the migrant crisis question, just declared that Islam didn't belong to Germany. And both of those ministers, interestingly, have a history of being conservative but opposed to Merkel. So she'll definitely have a tough time to fend off in that new coalition.
Briefly, because we're running out of time, I want to get to a couple of issues there. Let's talk about the rise of the far right. Now, the Alternative for Germany party polled very well, largely because of this influx of something like, I think it's 1 million migrants since 2015. Tell us more about what sort of force they'll be in Parliament.
Well, in effect, now that the SPD entered the Great Coalition, it makes the AfD the first opposition party in the parliament. So the far right, which was unthinkable a couple of years back, now joined the German parliament as the first opposition force, and they will have quite strong leverage on any law that will be passed. And the parliament definitely shifted in a much more conservative / far right direction now.
The issue of abortion in Germany. Germany still has a Nazi-era law that makes it illegal for doctors to offer abortion services or even give abortion advice. The parliament is split over this issue. Can you just take us through what's being said on that subject?
Yeah, there was a controversy a few weeks back because a German doctor had been fined 6,000 euros for having advertised practicing abortion in her practice. And it's a really conservative party where there's that paragraph in the German criminal code which renders abortion illegal, although women wouldn't be prosecuted if they do proceed with that. But this paragraph has been long debated in the parliament, but so far, because it's conservative, there's no political party which has enough power in parliament to actually cancel this paragraph.
Okay, I've got about under a minute left. I want to ask you just briefly, Merkel chose France as the destination for her first trip since she was sworn in. She was here in Paris for talks with Macron, who's got big ideas about reforming the Eurozone. Tell us, is this new grand coalition in Germany, is it good for Macron and his European ideas?
I think it's definitely better than when the relationship between finances minister were depending on Wolfgang Schäuble, who was an advocate for austerity, and that's not Macron's views for Europe and ideas of reform. So I think this coalition might be much more beneficial for Emmanuel Macron, and of course it's highly symbolic that Angela Merkel, just as Macron had done just after his election, had paid her first official state visit to Emmanuel Macron.
To France. And those two leaders have unveiled a roadmap for changes on all kinds of areas, from trade and migration in the Eurozone, and that's all to be announced in June. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. My thanks there to Emmanuelle Chaze.
Thanks so much, Alan.
Thanks for being with us here on Paris Live PM. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow, so do join us then. Bye-bye.